It was a pretty brutal scene in here. This unit in 1980, as I said, it was protective custody. There are 90 cells in this cell block. And at that time, there could be over 200 people in here, which means in a number of these cells, there were 3 people in a 6x9 cell that already had a double bunk, a toilet, and a sink in it. They were very overcrowded. On February 2nd, the day of the riot, the inmates, everything you read or films that have been made about it, they had a lot of antagonism towards the inmates that were housed in here. You had guys who had testified against other inmates in the community, and they saw them as the reason they were in prison. You had guys who had provided information to the administration about illegal activity that might have been going on amongst inmates in the prison. You had guys who had been sexually assaulted in prison population and had identified the people who sexually assaulted them were in here. And I also had a number of people who had crimes that placed them in danger, who had molested children or high profile. I had one fellow who had sexually assaulted a nun. They were high profile crimes that they couldn't live in general population. The inmates, after the control center was taken and they got a hold of the acetylene torches from the construction that was being done in cell block 5, they cut their way into this block and then cut open the grill boxes. You see there the controls for the grill, and started opening all the cell doors. Couple of things happened, and if you look at a map of this cell block and where the murders took place that happened in here, very much it was the first people they got to that weren't able to get out and away. They started going to work on in some cases, inmates came in here looking for somebody specific who they had a grudge with. In other cases, they'd say, hey, there's so-and-so, let's get him. They used blowtorches, they did some pretty horrific things. This was the de facto mental health unit for the corrections department at that time. There was no mental health unit where we could house acutely mentally ill inmates, and I had a number of them in here. And the one inmate in particular who was decapitated during the riot was totally unaware of what was going on around him. He had no idea of the danger he was in, and was killed for essentially the reason that he was black and he wasn't smart enough to get out of here. It was a very sad time. I went down to the south side to B1. The water was about 6 inches deep. Everything was covered in smoke and soot and ash, and there was debris everywhere. They had issued us rubber boots to come back in, and I saw that blood red water, and memory stays with me. When I came down here, I saw where they had torched their way in. I saw human remains on the wall of the cell block. I went to individual cells where I had already been told some of the inmates that had been killed, and I went to their cells. As I recall, there was only one inmate body still in a cell in here that they had not removed, who had been murdered in a horrible way. He was set on fire. And he, again, a very gentle, kind little man. And give me a minute. And the other cells showed damage. You could see where a number of inmates had jumped and been thrown off of the tiers to try and save themselves. And another cell that really stuck with me was upstairs here. They had beat a guy to death on a toilet seat and had broken the toilet in half, and there was this, where they pulled his body out, there was just this, you see pictures very often of that cell where the blood was pathed out, and again, he had the opportunity to leave cell block 4 that day with some other inmates, but he was a born-again Christian and told them that God would protect him, and it didn't work out. 2 years after the riot, after I had left, I had come back to work for the Department of Central, and I had not been inside here in 2 years. when I came down the hallway, everything had been redone, repainted. They were housing inmates again. I stepped through the control center into the central corridor, and immediately, it's the only time I can recall in my life, I had an olfactory hallucination. I immediately, and it wasn't like sort of a sensation, I immediately could smell the smell that was in here that February morning. It was a combination of fire, solvents, and death. There was just so much horrific things that had been done. The smell, and I've talked to other people. That's one thing. Years later, you'll come back in, and all of a sudden, you'll find yourself. That smell comes back to you, even though it's not really there.